Hi, good evening, everybody. So this evening's talk is going to be more about coronavirus. Going to talk about COVID-19, and I want to go through a couple of different things that have been brought up in the media recently. So one of them, a term that's been used quite a lot, is herd immunity, and something else that I've heard quite a bit as well is viral load, especially in relation to the fact that we've had these changes in dormitories. So I know we did a big long form video before where I was explaining more about the coronavirus, how it starts and how to prevent it. Today is going to be good to go over some of those terms, some of the things that may have been a little less clear at the moment, and to try and make sense of some of the things that are going over. Now, as a little disclaimer at the beginning, I am not a researcher, I am not an immunologist, I'm not a virologist. I do not study coronavirus. However, I have done extensive research in my own time to try and provide you with the best information as I can. I will say as well that if you look on things like, say, Facebook, you're going to see this very big range of people. You're going to see some people where they're completely against this, saying that of course this is just, it's some sort of hoax or something, the very extremes. You have some people, like we see what's happening to some extent in Sweden, where they're suggesting herd immunity, and other people where they are really going more that we should have social distancing. I am not here to bring out my biases. My choice instead today is to actually try to bring some objectivity by going through some of the research and some of the scientific aspects of why we are doing these measures, as well as what those particular meanings are. One of the things I mentioned as well is some of the things that are happening in dormitories. Of course, this is more relevant to what's happening here in Singapore, where we're starting to see this big spike in terms of cases. That's one thing that's quite key to what we call viral load, and something I'll be explaining as we go further along. I do have a few notes as well, because there's some stats and some numbers. I want to make sure that we get completely correct today. So, the first thing I want to start with is talking about what viruses are. It's something we covered briefly in the last video, but I want to go over things today just to make sure that everybody understands things very clearly. Generally, when people are talking, especially when it comes to things like health and sickness, viruses and bacteria end up being lumped together because there's something very small we can't understand, and it starts to have these potentially sick effects on the body. However, they are very different. Bacteria is a living cell, it's a living organism, in the same way that you, I, animals, plants, all of these things are living. However, a bacteria is different in the way of being to a virus, because a virus, one thing it's heavily debated in scientific communities, is not alive. There are many people that may say that it is, but to be honest, the overwhelming majority would say that bacteria are alive, but viruses are not. The reason for this is because for a virus to be active and to actually start to have an effect, it has to have a host. It is a parasite of sorts. A bacteria, however, does not need to have that host. All it needs to have is food or oxygen or anything else that's living on. Again, for an example, if you take a plant and you put it outside, it doesn't need another plant to live off of technically. It can then survive instead on what it's getting out of the soil. It can get things from sunlight, it can get from water. The same for you or I. We may have people around us that may help us and care for us, but we can survive on our own. A virus cannot. And it's one of the reasons why they're making such a big point on the media saying how long things are lasting for. Again, this is something I cannot comment on because I have not got the research for this. But in terms of, say, this virus being able to live on certain surfaces, this is why it's such an important factor, because it's something where it's technically not really alive. Again, it's a debated topic. But if it can then survive at least for a short amount of time as a parasite on those surfaces, that's where it becomes more of an issue. And it's one of the reasons why people are more concerned about, again, viral load, which I'll explain later, and also about more people getting infected, and of course the higher mortality rate compared to other viruses which may not last as well on some of these surfaces. Now, I want to say when it comes to viruses, this is not a new problem. This is not the first virus we've ever had. We've had, as far as we know, from a human perspective, we've had hundreds of thousands to millions of viruses. From what we predict of actually seeing within the world, even the ones we have never encountered or reacted with, whether it's because we haven't got there yet, or because they are interacting with other organisms such as other animals, there are millions upon potentially billions of different types of viruses. These viruses, again, they are parasites. These are other ways that they will get into some other type of host, and they will take over them, and then they will try to, of course, use up their resources to stay alive. However, one thing to remember is that we have always been in contact with them. It's not just the fact that they've been around for hundreds of millions of years, but it's also the fact that we have been in contact with them since we were born. They are in us at every point. For all of us, we have bacteria and viruses within the body or on the body at all points in our life. That's one thing we have to be very aware of. And it's not necessarily that anytime we have a virus we get sick or we will have a problem, but it's that when it becomes a bigger issue in terms of the amount of the virus or the weakness of us, that's where it becomes more of a factor and can start to affect our health. The way that we actually usually deal with viruses is that we don't have to take antibiotics, because antibiotics by name are not for viruses, they're for the biotics, which would be bacteria. But what we do to deal with them is the body's natural ability with the immune system will develop antibodies. So again, one other thing I want to go just very briefly, because I've seen this again as a slightly confused nomenclature, the naming. Antigens are produced by a virus to damage the cell. It's kind of like producing a poison to make sure they can get into more cells or they can do damage to its host. However, an antibody is produced by us so that we can help to fight against that. That's something that's positive and it's helping us. And that's really how we deal with how we deal with viruses, by producing these antibodies. And again, like I mentioned, this is something that's not new to us. We've been fighting viruses since the day we're born. It's one of the reasons why we're so protective of our babies. It's not because they don't have a strong immune system. Comparatively, again, I'll go over this in a minute, they actually have quite strong immune systems. The difference with babies, though, is that they've never encountered any of these viruses before. When you get to the point of being an adult, you've probably encountered thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or more, of different types of viruses in different amounts of quantities. Over this time, your body has dealt with them and it's become stronger over time. However, sometimes, if there is a build-up of them, this is when it can start to have more of an effect. As I mentioned, one of the reasons we're more protective when it comes to children and babies is because they haven't had that capability. They will have some transferred immunity that comes from their mother. However, for a lot of the immunity they need to build it up gradually over time. One way I would think about this is, if you think about this way to develop antibodies, it's a little bit like, say, training, like strength training or exercise. If somebody goes into a gym and they're doing weights, the first day they go in, they're probably not going to be lifting 100 kilos off the floor. They're going to be doing whatever their physical capability is. Over time, as they progress further up, that's where they'll get stronger. However, the difference here is that, of course, it's all dependent on the amount of weight you're trying to lift up in that point. If someone goes in for the first time they're in a gym and they lift up some 5 kilogram weights, no problem. If they go in and try to do it with 40 kilogram weights, they either won't be able to do it, so they won't be able to fight against it, or they may actually end up injuring themselves. And this is kind of similar with the viruses as well. When the virus starts to affect someone, especially say a baby who has never encountered this before, they may not be able to take on all of the different viruses going on, because it's like having 100 different type of 5 kilogram weights to try and all pick up at once. Again, it's one of the reasons we're so protective with babies and children. One of the things that can happen though is, again, we can have this effect of viral load. So one way I would like to think about this, and we'll get really into now what this means, is if you think about you and your health is like a house. And in this house, you have all of your different systems, your muscles, your organs, your skin, everything else. The thing that's protecting all of those important parts of you is your immune system. Your immune system is kind of like a security system for the house. So around the house, you've got CCTV, you've got guard dogs, you've got a bodyguard standing at the front, you've got, laser guided things that are detecting if people are around, you've got someone on the roof, you've got all of these different things protecting you at all points. However, if there's a breakdown in that outside security, that would be similar to having a breakdown or reduced strength in your immunity. At all points, you have this house, you have this great security system going on around it, but there's always these people, and they're trying to burgle your house. They're trying to get in, they're trying to get stuff, they're trying to have their way and do what they want to do. This in some way would be equivalent to the viruses or even certain types of bacteria. Not all, some bacteria are actually very good for us and make up a significant part of us, but it can be related to some of them as well. So again, we have this house, which is our health, the outside security, which is the immune system, and the burglars trying to get in. This would be the viruses and some bacteria. Now again, they're going to always be there. The truth of the matter is we have something valuable that they want. So they're always going to be there, trying to be advantageous, trying to take advantage when they can. The only time this is going to happen is in 2 particular instances. So number one, again, I want you to picture this house with a security system. And it's one burglar, and he keeps running up to your house. The problem is, there's all these guard dogs and everything else, he can't get in, so he's not going to be able to do it. However, one day, you may have all this security, but you accidentally leave the front door open. This is when that virus is managing to get through. This would be equivalent to having a weakness in our immune system. Now again, this is something we talk about, especially for myself as a chiropractor. We talk a lot about changes in stress, changes in weakness, and the overall adaptability of the body, because that's really what this is all about. It's about adaptability. But this can be due to things like stress. It can be due to, again, mental or emotional stress. It can be due to chemical stresses. It can be due to physical stresses. It can be due to injuries. It can be due to underlying other conditions. And then there are some factors of our lifestyle as well, such as if we are older. That is one of the factors which can, over time, weaken the immune system, also developed and kind of combining with some of the other things that may happen in our life. You know, if we already have a predisposed illness or what we call a comorbidity, this may leave us more likely to have this kind of open door situation. So number one, we can have this open door, which again is where there is a weakness in our own security system, our own immunity. However, the other one is viral load. Now, viral load is the equivalent of having this very strong security system around our house, but instead of having one burglar outside, there's 10, there's 100, there's 1,000. Over time, each part of the security system is so busy dealing with one of these burglars, you know, one dog is fighting off one security camera is pointing at one person, one bodyguard is fighting one person, that something else weakens and they manage to get in. It's kind of like having an army, and if there's 10,000 people at the doors, this is when they're much more susceptible than if there was one person trying to make their way through. This is what viral load is, and it's one of the reasons why we're having social distancing at the moment. Because viral load is where instead of having, say, 1 or 2 bacteria or virus in the body, which your body can deal with and has been dealing with so far for your whole life quite well, instead you're now dealing with a much higher number. So you're starting to have more of these potentially stronger viruses in the body, and then they can accrue together and it may overwhelm the nerve system and the immune system. And the immune system, again, is a limited factor. It's incredibly amazing how it works. To go into it, I mean, it's literally, people not just do a degree, people do PhDs and they continue the whole career all about how the immune system works in immunology. But one thing that has to be remembered is that, like us, it is limited and it can only deal with a certain amount. So over time, if there's too much of that build-up, too much of that viral load, it will start to affect us. This is one of the main concerns and one of the main reasons why we're having social distancing at the moment. It's to reduce that viral load for all of us. So that means that we have less of a chance of contracting that virus, as well as the fact that if, say, we are carriers of that virus, even if we have no symptoms, that we're not putting that back out into the community and then increasing other people's viral load who may have more of a vulnerability than ourselves. Unfortunately, especially for the coronavirus, it's one of the reasons why it seems to have such an effect on the elderly. The elderly generally will have a weaker immune system, especially, you know, if you live a long life, hopefully an amazing and happy life. There may have been some sicknesses along the way. There may have been stresses and, you know, lack of sleep in nights and other things that progressively had some degeneration on the body. All of these things over time will mean that there is some level of increased susceptibility. One of the things, fortunately, we have seen is that there seems to be less effect on children and babies. I'm not saying it's perfect. Unfortunately, there have been some affected families because of children who have either been sick or unfortunately lost their lives. But one of the reasons why it's happening less is because they actually have quite a strong immunity. It's just because when kids are small, we think they get sick all the time. It's not necessarily that they're actually getting sick because they're weak. It's because, as I mentioned earlier, they're dealing with everything. It's their first time dealing with these viruses. So it's not just that they're dealing with one, they're trying to pick up all those 5 kilogram weights off the floor, as I mentioned earlier. So this has been one of the main factors really starting to affect viral load. One of the things that people have been talking about as well, I've seen this very heavily, is herd immunity. Again, I'm not here to debate people, I'm not here to say my personal views on this, I'm just here to try and explain why herd immunity is good and bad, and why people who are for herd immunity and also for social distancing both have valid points, to be honest, when it comes to this. Herd immunity means that it comes to a point where within a society or a community, everyone has had some sort of exposure to the virus or the bacteria. And that means they've already had a chance then potentially to build up those antibodies themselves, because this is how things work within the body, this is how we fight things off. And it means at that point then everyone is kind of safe, essentially. One way to think of it is very similar to the flu virus, which again has been compared many times to COVID-19. When we all have some level of exposure to it, it will affect us all differently. Some people, they may end up unfortunately in hospital with pneumonia, and some people may have no symptoms. You have some people in the middle who may have a bit of a cough or a bit of a sneeze, but there's a range all the way through. One of the big differences though is that the level of mortality is much lower for that type of virus. That's one of the reasons why we don't have lockdowns or this kind of pandemic activity with the every yearly, I guess, flu. So one of the things really to remember is that the herd immunity idea it's going to happen. Eventually it will reach that point. It has to reach that point, otherwise we are always going to be on a pandemic kind of semi-lockdown, and there's always going to be this effect on everybody. But it has to reach that point eventually. And one of the problems that we do have for some people who are vindicating to come out early, which again I agree to some extent, I think herd immunity is a good idea, But if we come out too early for this, it means it starts to increase that viral load on some of the people that are more susceptible and vulnerable within our society. And it also means that if there are more people that are getting sick, more of them are then going to be going to GPs and to hospitals, which means they can either, number one, infect other people when they're there who maybe didn't have the virus already, but it also means it increases the workload for our healthcare workers. And our healthcare workers, I know some friends of mine who are working in healthcare as frontliners here in Singapore, they're already working extremely hard. They're already doing longer hours. As far as I know, there is no holidays. Everything has been cancelled. All sorts of leave is cancelled because people have to deal with this virus at the moment. And if we don't slow things down by having things like social distancing and of course staying home more when we can, then it means that we are going to be putting more stress on them. And it's not just of course about them, but it's also about the patients they're treating. Because if more people are then coming in, potentially even more than they're able to handle, this is where more people are going to be hurt. Not just from COVID, but also from other conditions as well, where, again, much like our immune system being finite and being limited, so are our healthcare professionals and our doctors and our nurses and porters and everyone else. They cannot take care of everybody, and if more people are coming in because of this problem, then they may either not be able to treat them properly, or it may start to affect the other conditions and problems that they're trying to help them with as well. So it is important, at least at the moment, to make sure we are doing social distancing, we are staying safe, and we are staying home whenever possible. Because it's not just, again, always about us and our effects, but also it starts to affect other people. So like I said, overall herd immunity, it's going to happen. It has to happen. In terms of infectious diseases, I was doing some research today and I found some statistics that are backed up both by Nature, which again is a medical journal, and also by WHO, the World Health Organization. Both of which estimate that in a typical year, there's just over 17 million deaths by infectious diseases. Now we have to understand that for the majority of those, they are not in this kind of controlled situation globally where we're all not going out. Majority of the time, it's going to have people where they're still living their lives and they're still at a level of infection. I know we see the news a lot and we see all these numbers that seem very scary. And there is of course the other side where some people say, oh, the numbers are higher for this, this and that. What I would say, at least for the people concerned about the numbers being in some ways too low, is that this is with us having all of these safe measures. What would happen if we had higher measures? We're doing the best that we can, again, not me, of course myself, I'm not working in the hospitals, but the people who are, to make sure that we're preventing this becoming a much bigger problem than it does. And it's very important then that, again, as much as we want to have herd immunity, and we will have herd immunity, we have to have some patience with this and give this a bit of time before we get to that stage. So the last thing I want to say just before we go is, to be frank, this may not be our last pandemic. This is something that a lot of scientists have been talking about for a long time and are predicting, saying that this may be something that's coming up. It's actually kind of concerning when you see how many people have had research going into different types of coronaviruses for a number of years. All I would say is hopefully this gives us more of an insight into personally some of the things that we can do to either make ourselves happier, improve ourselves, or be more mindful and respectful of the people around us. Hopefully then for some people it will kind of give more insight into things we can improve going on to the future, again not just society but for ourselves, and hopefully it makes us a bit more, again, just cautious in some ways. Not to say that we should be scared of everything, we shouldn't. Again, we've been fighting millions of different types of viruses for the whole of your life. But it's to make sure that we are actually, again, being cautious about some of the little things in the future. Some of the simple things that we should already be doing, like sneezing into your elbow, like washing your hands. These are some of the simple things we can do. I talked before about how 17 million people are infected by infectious diseases. That number, at least for a percentage of the population of the world, used to be much, much higher. It used to be the thing that unfortunately was killing most people. However, things like clean water and proper sanitation, these are the things that will bring that down as well. This should be the same for this virus, something we can hopefully look forward as we go into. For the people that are currently at home, especially here in Singapore, especially if you're living at home, hopefully it's not too bad. I mean, if you ever need to reach out to somebody, of course, reaching out to your friends and family, but if you ever need to, you can always, message me on my WhatsApp account or on my Facebook. You're more than welcome. I'll always kind of reply back as fast as I can. And if you have anything else that you want to talk about, you can put it into the comments too. What I would say now is just for everybody, try and do the best you can to take care of yourself and the people around you. Stay strong and stay safe.